Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sims speaking to you from eyeforpharma in London. I hope you can hear me clearly, as there might be a couple of audio issues at the moment, but bear with me. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. I can see that we already have a good audience on board, but don't go anywhere. We'll be with you in just a minute and we'll start the webinar then. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Paul Sims speaking to you from London. I'm a chairman at eyeforpharma and really excited that you could all be here today. As you can hopefully see on the screen in front of you, what we're going to be talking about is digital payer engagement. And indeed, I'm going to be joined, as you'll see in a moment, by some very capable people, and we're going to be taken through this topic. But the way in which we framed this event is that it's market access's hidden digital opportunity, I suppose you could say. And, you know, this is not something that is mainstream yet, that's certainly for sure. But it is something that has ignited imagination of most of you. It's a fairly popular webinar. We've got more than 800 of you signed up today. And I suppose our motivation is that it's very clear that the value-based health economy is here and it's only going to grow towards being more value-dependent. And as a result of that, of course, market access requirements are becoming far more essential, sophisticated, and nuanced. So theoretically, technology should be able to help us in some various different ways. We should be able to adapt some of the techniques that our commercial colleagues use when it comes to more payer-focused relations. We should be able to explore unexplored channels. We should be able to do more to enhance the sort of face-to-face discussion. And we should ultimately be able to communicate better, and whether that be in the foreground or the background, to provide the information and the knowledge that is indeed going to help us get towards that value-based health that we are trying to achieve. So the premise, I suppose, is strong, even if the evidence so far is still quite weak relatively. So today's webinar is going to be, as I say, a little bit different. It's going to be a bit more exploratory than perhaps previous or other eyeforpharma webinars. And I want you guys to really understand that, because today we're not going to be necessarily giving you every single one of the answers on a plate. What we'd really like to do is to have a discussion with you, to explore with you exactly what is going to be key. So let me just quickly move to my next slide and introduce the panelists that we have today. So top left is Sachin. Sachin Kamal is with Pfizer, and he's currently the Vice President and Head of the Center of Health Systems Innovation. And I'm just going to pause and move on from Sachin for the moment, because the reality is that unfortunately Sachin has not been able to join the webinar as yet. He's actually suffering a couple of technical issues just now. So we're hoping that he's going to join us in a few minutes' time, and I might well introduce him properly then. Underneath Sachin, though, is Mads. Now, Mads, you may well know very well if you've been to eyeforpharma events. He's been a good face to have there. He's actually spent 15 years working in digital technology of various descriptions, with only the last 6 to 7 in pharma, but in various roles in marketing, communication, and sales. And if you're not familiar with Ignicio, you might not be if you've come from the market access area. Ignicio is probably the best in the business when it comes to providing multi-channel marketing technology and capabilities, historically in the commercial area, but increasingly moving beyond that into all forms of stakeholders and more personalized communications as well. So really pleased that Mads is on board, and I should let you know that his company Ignicio has very much been in the driving seat for making today's session happen. So been a great partner to work with in doing that, and Mads, really pleased that you and your team have helped us get such a good audience with us today. Mads is also a mountain biker and poker player. I don't think we're going to see evidence of either of those today, but watch out if he is looking at you with a poker face, I guess. So top right is Grace. Grace joins us from NICE, and she's been there for close to 5 years now. She's an experienced advisor when it comes to health technology assessment, infectious diseases, and public policy being her areas of expertise. She's worked with government and academia in technical writing, in various educational training, management, and speaking roles as well. She's got a PhD in health policy analysis and infectious diseases. She actually tells me that she had a focus on biological weapons as well as emerging infectious diseases as part of her PhD. Hopefully also see no evidence of that today either, from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's actually Canadian, but has been in the UK since the age of 11, in case you hear a Canadian accent in a moment. And then last but certainly not least is Matt. Matt has now at Synovian. He was with Pfizer for 15 years, but now Synovian is where he resides, and he has responsibility really for all aspects of managed markets, including account management, marketing, trade, contracting, pricing, and reimbursement. So a fairly broad role there, and Matt's actually spoken, not recently, but on a few webinars and a few conferences of ours in the past, and has always delivered really fantastic information in all those occasions. So really pleased that you could be here, Matt, and thank you so much for that. Okay, so what I want to do is actually just quickly start by giving you a bit of information that, believe it or not, came from you in the first place, and that's this graph here. You might remember that when you signed up for today's webinar, you actually answered a couple of questions on the way in. And as I said, we had more than 800 people signed up, so some useful data here. What's your biggest barrier when it comes to successful payer engagement? So as you can see, gaining access to the payer is the highest with nearly a quarter, it's the second highest with a quarter of the results, but we've emphasized those two at the bottom. Just thought it might be quite an interesting thing to look at. I'm actually going to invite our panelists at this stage to comment on those findings if they indeed do before I move on. So Grace, Mads, or Matt, anything that strikes you as interesting from that graph?
Well, from the NICE perspective, it's interesting that gaining access to the payer is 24%, because we feel that our processes are quite clear online. So I would be quite interested to find out what the barrier is there for people feeling like they can't access NICE.
Well, we're going to talk about that a lot more for sure. Anyone else?
Paul, this is Matt. I think it was very interesting. I appreciate, as you mentioned, I've been involved with several eyeforpharma conferences previously, and I know with these webinars we get quite an international audience, and it's interesting to see that what looks to be the commonalities in other countries to what we see here in the U.S. My purview is just North America, but it's similar to what it looks like others are experiencing as well.
Right.
Yeah, and if I can just comment as well, I think it's quite interesting that with the focus on product benefits and also the access part, and I think some of it has to do with I don't know that we're going to explore that further, but I was talking to a category manager that's working for one of the big regions here in Denmark, and she was saying that they always got suppliers in to pitch their products, and it was remarkable how many of them were actually providing this inside out perspective, so spending maybe 20 out of 30 minutes on pitching a product and without even asking a question about, so what is it that payers that they need. So I think sometimes that has to do with the access part and also about the product benefits part. So look forward to exploring that further.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let's move on to the next question that we will ask everybody. What's stopping you from further applying digital technology in market access? So here we have a clear winner of I'm unclear, and then close behind that, unaware of the opportunities. Actually, some of the things that we might have thought might be higher up on the list, like the high cost, the priority, the limited opportunity, not coming anywhere near those, only half as much. So again, any comments from our panel quickly on that before I move on?
Yeah, I think it just showcases that we have a very curious audience, and this is an unexplored area as well.
Yeah. Grace, I think you were saying something there.
No, actually, that wasn't me.
Oh, Matt.
It was Matt, Paul. So I agreeing with what Sash was mentioning there. I think it goes back to your introduction. I think we're all in the exploratory mode. Some of us have got a toe in, maybe a foot in, up to the knee, but I think a lot more to learn here.
Okay, so this is definitely setting the scene. As you can see, you guys are definitely with me, and as you just said, Matt, this is an area which we're going to explore. Now, what I want is for everybody who's listening to have a look at the right-hand side of their screens where they'll see a little questions box. So if you take a look at that now and maybe just write a quick hello in there so that I know that you're listening and you haven't fallen asleep already. And once you have done that, I can see some hellos coming in. Thanks very much for those. I want you guys to use this document. As I've just said, we're not going to be dictating things to you today. We're going to be exploring together. So I need for everybody to write down what it is that they want to know in the box, and make sure your questions get asked, and it's the only way that we can make sure that we answer them properly. So do please use this throughout the next hour. But the first thing we're actually going to do is actually hand over to Mads, who's going to set the scene a little bit. And if I just share the screen with you now, Mads, you should hopefully get the ability to do that. Then Mads is going to take you through a few slides on his side. There we go. I think we can see your screen now, Mads. Right. There we go. Perfect.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Paul. So according to Boston Consulting Group, they were doing a report on medtech companies, and they were saying that medtech companies that changed their focus towards economic buyers are seeing a 250% increase in revenue. Mm-hmm. Now, there's obviously a great diversity within segments and between pharma and medtech, as Paul is also mentioning, but I assume we can all agree that central procurement payer institutions impact our businesses, which is also why we see this level of interest here today. So how do you optimize your company's impact on the complex tender process and this complex stakeholder landscape? At Ignition, we are experiencing that we can benefit from digital technology. So here are three solid arguments for that. Payers are, like the total population, becoming more tech savvy, relying on digital resources in their daily work. Payers acknowledge that interactive, engaging content empower better meetings. Payers depend on collaboration with you, with us as suppliers. Tenders are no longer just cost-centered. It may seem that way sometimes, but they also need to drive better health. I'm pretty certain that Grace can acknowledge that as well. I was chairing at a conference in London last month where administrative buyers from both Italy and Portugal explained how they worked very hard to build in concrete measures for how treatments were providing value. So looking at this combination of expected treatment outcomes and cost of care in their tenders. So if we have a look at the tender process, general tender process, I'll be honest up front, as Paul was saying, I'm working for a company that delivers software and solutions to support how you maximize your engagements with your key stakeholders. The rest of you guys are experts on how the specific parts of a tender within your area works and how they differ from country to country. So looking at it from more of an overall strategic perspective, here's where I see massive opportunity. The pre-tender phase, where specifications are made, has an enormous impact on the tender itself, which means that work in this phase needs to be managed very carefully. Also, health economic arguments are becoming increasingly important. So delivering them clearly is really crucial. And finally, the number of stakeholders and touch points, especially in the pre-tender phase, suggests that there is an opportunity for pharma to optimize how engagements are managed and how activities are connected. So tender managers have the right information at hand when they pre-select suppliers. Now, Paul mentioned it in the introduction. In the commercial departments, we have for the past 5 or 10 years had the resources and the luxury to apply digital technology to help deliver our messages in the most impactful way across multiple touch points and channels. Now, our ambition with involving ourselves in this event. And our ambition at Agnisho is to take these learnings and make them available for those of you that work within market access. So let's first touch upon the communications. Complex health economic arguments. They do differ from traditional brand messaging, but the essentials are really still the same. So let me share a case from one of our customers, a top pharma company that we're working within oncology. They used digital technology to support them in their payer engagements. They were challenged by increased competition, which many of you probably also experience, and an increased focus on price. So they wanted to make it clear that they were the right long-term partner and how their treatments impacted health outcomes. So they did two things. They leveraged digital content to apply storytelling to tell the story about how their company as a trustworthy partner that invested heavily in new treatments, and they embedded their health economic calculations into e-detailers that could be adapted by market access people on the fly so that it was fitting with the audience's expectations. So in this way, digital tools facilitate clearer communication, clearer argumentation. The other element I wanted to touch upon before I'll hand back over to Paul is how technology can help manage the stakeholder landscape and enhance the value of payer engagements. Let's look at this map of key influencers that we need to address. So this could include a top surgeon at the central hospital, the head nurse that's responsible for educating and training of patients, the hospital manager, and key stakeholders on the actual tender team. In simplified form, the ambition is to make sure we provide relevant and timely support to each of these stakeholders. To enable this, we need everyone on the account team to have access to all the insights. Engagement data facilitates that. So how do you tactically do that then? One solution, one of the learnings from working with it on the commercial side, is to break it all down and develop independent customer journeys for our stakeholders. Now, this journey here showcases how we work with Maria Gonzalez in the pre-tender team across channels to provide the information and clinical data that she needs when she needs it to build the optimal tender. What's essential is to maximize collaboration at every single touch point. We want to ensure that Maria and her team know exactly how our treatments help provide better care. This means they can build the information into the tender documents and combine outcomes and costs and thereby help them meet their objectives. So I see huge undiscovered potential in benefiting from how we've used digital technology in sales marketing to strengthen our payer relationships. For mutual benefit, I was just getting a pop-up, which was a bit weird. Based on the survey responses that clearly show that this is a new area of opportunity, the question that I'd really like to explore here today is if market access should be the last area to adopt digital or the best ones to do it, really. So that's the challenge for us today. Paul, if you'll take over.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Mads. That's really good. And I can see some of the questions have started to roll in. Let's keep those coming, please, everybody. But from time being, what I'm going to do is actually give you guys a multiple choice question to answer. So if you look at your screen right now, this is just going to, sorry, I realized that that has gone a bit wrong. There we go. Put it back to presentation mode. What I'd really like to do is to actually put this in front of you right now. Based on maybe what Mads has just said and based on where you've got to so far in your thinking, what's your answer to this question? Do you currently plan to introduce new digital technologies to support your payer engagement right now? So yes, you're on top of current significant use. So in other words, you're doing it already and you plan to do more. Or perhaps, yes, you're just at the beginning of your venture in this procedure. No, you're simply not aware of the opportunities that exist. That's obviously one of the reasons why we're running this session today. or no, you've actually considered it and you've decided against actually doing it. Finally, we've given you a not sure option. I don't normally give you a not sure option, but here I've been quite generous, I think, in allowing you to plump for that one. But I'm going to hold. I can see that we've had nearly half of you vote so far. I'll hold that open for another 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, everybody who voted. Let's have a quick look at the results, shall we? Okay. Believe it or not, I can't actually see the results from my screen, so I'm just grabbing another screen. There we go. So yeah, there's a clear winner. Nearly half the people saying that we're beginning to venture. Bit of a normal distribution, I'd say, with 20% of people also saying not sure, but generally not very many people doing it at the moment, and that's where we are. So I think that probably just emphasizes some of the things that we've already said, but I want to try and get the panel in now on these questions and answers. So panel, anything that's come from either the results of the survey or from the slides that Mads presented that's particularly striking to you?
Well, I thought it was quite interesting how people were talking about value and trying to communicate value, because I guess maybe I'm a little bit lo-fi here, but to me and to NICE in general, I think really, value is about things like patient-related outcomes, it's about overall survival, and it's about resource use. And it's very well to sort of position yourself as a trusted group of people, but actually it's not really about that so much as demonstrating value. So digital engagement is definitely one way to do that, and I think we're going to come on a bit later to talking about how it can really enhance it. But the core fundamentals from the HTA perspective are going to remain the same. How you express it and the accuracy of the data and the amount of the data, that all might change over time. But the very fundamental element of value isn't likely to change very much.
Yeah, this is Sachin. Hopefully you guys can hear me as well. Just to build on that, I think, you know, I agree. I think the way I sort of look at digital and technology in general is sort of a platform or an enabling function to help ascertain, you know, more systematically, efficiently, elements of value that are inherently built into HTA systems, guidelines, and whatever have you. There is the opportunity at the periphery, and this is sort of a, you know, long sort of shot, and then if it works, you know, it'll have to be validated. But perhaps the opportunity of capturing newer elements of value that are not captured in the traditional framework, and sort of supplementing that as we think about value. But the fundamental, I think, near-term opportunity is the, you know, the platform that digital can provide to look at, you know, defined definitions and domains of value.
Can I just say, Sachin, welcome to the webinar. For some reason, you're still not appearing on my screen, but we can definitely hear you. So thank you for joining and being a part of this. I'm not sure how much of the previous conversation you heard, but just very quickly, Sachin, in case you're not aware, is actually Center for Health Systems Innovation at Pfizer. It's actually a new center that was created under his leadership that develops and integrates innovative approaches based on the various risks and technical underpinnings to address access and pricing. So really great that you've joined us. Thank you so much, Sachin. Let me come back to the others. Matt or Mads, do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I think, you know, most of what's been said I agree 100% with as well. One of the things we're looking at is not only, you know, the things that Sachin and Grace were talking about, kind of new opportunities or new value propositions to deliver, but how do we even more efficiently deliver some of the more, you know, blocking and tackling of the current interactions we've had with customers, or make those things more available to them when they're interested versus when we're pushing. So what we've created here at our organization is not only a push strategy in digital, but a pull strategy for customers to be able to go and get the information they need when it's the best time for them as well.
Yeah, and I can add to it. I'm completely aligned here as well. But I mean, I think speaking about value, and that, of course, when I speak value, I'm referring to outcomes-based value. So it's still tangible results, but to some degree, it's still in the process of defining. So how do you estimate the value of value? But for me, it's really about looking for those, if you take the Stephen Covey approach and take his win-win parameter, so how is it that you present something that's of relevance to the payers and kind of help them meet their KPIs, both in terms of economic measures, but also in terms of how to drive better care. I think that's really key when we talk about value.
Can I just say on that? I mean, from sort of an HTA nice perspective, that is fundamentally what we're here for, is to try and drive good patient outcomes. How we do that is very much a movable feast. I don't think anybody would say that the NICE processes are absolutely flawless and could never be improved, but that is fundamentally what we're trying to achieve.
And I think that's super. Yeah, just to round it off, I think that's really key to bear that in mind when we have this discussion, that there is a mutual interest in optimal care. So we should avoid seeing the payer side as a mere customers, but actually also as partners. I think that's really key.
Okay. I'm going to just read out a few audience questions at this stage. I'll sort of read out a few, and then panelists, you can choose which ones you address. There have been quite a few requests for any examples, case studies for digital implementation and market access. I think we can safely say there aren't very many, and that's what I said at the beginning as well. We're going to explore, but obviously if anyone does have anything or any glimmers that they can share with us, that would be great. Some of the other questions are, what data is available and what data is useful for such dialogue? Is there any kind of guidance that you can give in terms of what actually works for a more sophisticated engagement with payers? How are industry peers utilizing digital in market access to engage with payers? I guess that's another request for an example. I'll skip past that one. How reliable are digital platforms in respect of local customer inputs into market access tools such as health outcome models? That one's a little bit convoluted. I hope you can understand that one. What about, of course, digital medicine, digital therapeutics? How do you optimize payer engagement regarding that? Are those products more suitable for this type of communication just because of the very nature of the product? I think I know the answer, but I'll let you guys give the answer to that one. What means are best? So people wanting to talk about channels, various publications, websites, companies, obviously, and in combination with the offline methods as well. So I can see there's a lot more questions just coming in. I'll come to some of the newest ones in a moment. But does anybody want to address any of those for the time being?
Can I mean, they're not perfect examples. I won't pretend that they are, but can I talk about a couple of things that NICE is doing sort of related to this?
Of course.
Okay, so they kind of collectively start to answer some of these questions. One of them is called the MedTech Early Technical Assessment tool, and this is an online tool where very quickly, basically, a company with a new medical technology digital application diagnostic can fill in a synopsis, and then NICE or a different facilitating organization looks at the synopsis and then sits down with them for about an hour and a half face-to-face, talks about it, and then writes a report as a gap analysis. So it does blend some digital elements because it's, as I say, online, and some face-to-face elements. So there's both some idea of trying to put information in quite a standardized format so that it's easy to understand, but also incorporates the sort of face-to-face element and the sort of discussion element. Moving on from that, there's something called Health Tech Connect, which is again an online portal where we're hoping to launch this so that everybody will put in their information about medtech that they're developing or diagnostics or digital applications, so that they can sort of find new partners to work with. And the third element that's quite new is this digital evidence frameworks that should be launching very shortly as well, which discusses the level of evidence that will be needed for digital applications. So both in terms of clinical effectiveness and health economics, so economic effectiveness. And I think together these start to help you understand the kinds of tools that NICE is developing to try and integrate some of these digital ideas of payer engagement.
Thank you. I'd like to get sort of Shashan and Matt's sort of immediate response to that. Do those sound like things that are aligned with what you're doing and that you're going to be able to work with?
They do, Paul. In fact, and you know, on the first question, I think that came out around some examples. I'd love to share a couple things that we've done. You know, we've started with, you know, something as basic as just using digital technology to broadcast our message greater. What I mean by that is, you know, we just recently did a program for United Healthcare, and their VP of Pharmacist wants to share some information on a new product having COPD. And so we Skyped the training out to, you know, 120 of their PharmDs across the country as an example. Now that's not overly, you know, innovative, but certainly using technology to get it to everyone. Probably our greatest success that we've seen, though, is we built about a year ago. We built a website that was dedicated to market access leaders within the U.S. And what we've put on there is not so much product information. It's fairly unbranded, but it's got a lot of information around therapeutic disease areas that we work in. It's got some of the HEOR and outcomes data we have, as well as all of our clinical trial data is there. Also has information specific on budget calculators that HEOR builds as well. And some of the regulatory changes that are going on in the U.S. that are of high value for our customers. And we were very pleased. We've had about a little over 17,000 unique users to date. But what's really been interesting is that those users, 90% of them are repeat users. They look at an average of 6 pages and spend an average of 19 minutes. So anyone that's done anything with websites knows that's pretty amazing. And so I think what we did is we found a good sweet spot of understanding our customers' needs and delivering value there, right, to them as well. So we've done a few other things, but that's probably the most successful digital exchange we've had. And we're also, I don't want to take too much time on this, we're also using some digital devices to do biometric measuring as well, and created a website where both us and the customer, the health plan customer, can see the aggregated data to understand the learnings from that as well. So those are a couple examples of what we've done at Synovian.
Yeah, and just to supplement those two comments and give some more examples, you know, we've invested a fair bit in sort of using, you know, apps as a way to communicate as well as share information in therapeutic areas of interest to the company. There's several examples all tied to, you know, therapeutic areas where we have products that we've invested in. Some of them have been well received in the external community. I think the other piece of this is the other examples in the domains that we just talked about earlier, but to sort of build on the discussion already, the other area that may or may not directly be involved with the payer per se, but it will eventually is the role of digital in the R&D structure. And so one of the things that we're doing with the hope that eventually that will make it, you know, for discussions with the payers, is also investing in digital tools, devices, etc., to capture information in the R&D pipeline. We in fact have a small team that is focused solely on doing that in sort of enhancing the role of digital in clinical, you know, and try to collect that information systematically, which will then make it into submissions and dossiers, etc., and lend itself to discussions in that setting as well.
Thank you. Can I ask both of you, Shashan and Matt, that is, how have you managed to make the payer community aware in the first place of, firstly, the website that you've mentioned there, Matt, and actually get them to actually visit it, and secondly, Shashan, to provide that information that's coming from R&D? I'm not sure if you're saying that's being exposed in any way to payers directly, but presumably the trend is that the barriers between that data and the payer are effectively being removed gradually and effectively becoming more transparent. So for both of you, I'm just wondering how you actually have got to those places in the first place. I've also had a couple of people ask what the site is, Matt. So I don't know if you can share that with us.
Yeah, I can share that with you. It's synovianhealthinsights.com is what the site is. So, and it's open to everyone. There are some areas that are specific for market access colleagues. There's some areas that for people that are formulated approvers only because of our compliance, but the majority is for anyone. So Synovian Health Insights, SUNOVION, healthinsights.com. And how we started with the awareness, the good old-fashioned way. Our account directors, we actually had little business cards that had the website that we handed out to our customers. But probably our biggest uptake was we actually used, we have a lot of connections through LinkedIn, and so our account directors are connected with a lot of their customers. So we sent out a notice through LinkedIn that had a hot link for people to actually go directly to the site. And then the third is in the United States, there's a journal for managed care executives that it's a digital journal, and we had an advertisement in there where there was a hot link and people were able to go from there. So.
Yeah, and at our end also, I think on the app side, it's really been through the key account managers helping us disseminate that information. There's a large digital team at Pfizer that works closely on many of these things. In fact, you might have seen in some of the recent announcements that we're going to have a chief digital officer reporting directly to the CEO. So there's a serious attempt at trying to tackle the digital world, but specifically the tactics and dissemination has been the account management realm. On the R&D side, we have, I think at this point, really focused on what are the right sort of metrics, how can we build validated elements of value using these tools, and the focus is really the clinical engine. So the FDA, the R&D, the EMA, rather than sort of payers. But again, my hope is that as those tools get used systematically, and not all of them will be successful, but the ones that are will lend itself into discussions in the payer community.
It's amazing how many parallels there are with the commercial side of the business, isn't there, Matt? Obviously, with sales reps and account managers having to introduce digital tools in that space as well.
Yeah. I thought also, I mean, it's great to hear that this commercialization that's happening, and I guess that's also why Sajjan and Matt are moving into this space and taking responsibility in this space. So it's good to see that some of the approaches are starting to be adopted. So looking at it from an adoption process and looking at it at different steps of the journey and the interest. So really looking at the needs that are out there in various parts of the process. So that's interesting. For me also, I was picking up on some of the questions you mentioned earlier, Paul, both related to personalization, and I see that I have this stats from Boston Consulting Group again. They were saying that 6 to 10%. You will have a 6 to 10% impact on revenue if you become more personalized. So I see some, an opportunity with actually getting there using digital technology. So and also I think that another question was related to these health economic calculations, and I think there's something to be added or gained in the actual engagement. So that could be physical meetings and presentations where you actually optimize your message, but also in the extension of your engagements towards other channels. So we see that our fastest growing channel is remote. So using remote technologies to bring in some of the experts, and maybe, in Matt's example here, maybe to explain some of these studies about or clinical data that's out there, and facilitate discussions around that, and also so in that sense providing valuable information that feeds tenders. So I see that there are some good examples here.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry for interrupting you. One of the things you mentioned I wanted to maybe add on this is when you mentioned there is a lot of parallels with how this has really started on the commercial or on the more traditional sales side. And what's also very interesting is having been both a sales leader and a managed markets leader with leading customer-facing colleagues, it may be obvious, and so I apologize, everyone, but you have to make sure people understand as well that this is supplemental to their work, because I can tell you that when we first started doing digital engagements with healthcare professionals, reps thought we were trying to replace them and versus supplementing. And we've seen a little of that, by the way, in account management, that there's a little bit of fear that, you know, a computer was going to replace someone. That is never the intention and can never happen. But so when you're already, one of the recommendations I would suggest is if you're implementing these digital tools, make sure people know that it is supplemental to their work. And I think something Mads just mentioned, it's their ability then to help customize and tailor the way the digital messages are formatted and delivered to be more specific to their individual customers' needs.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read out a few more audience questions. I've got quite a few interesting ones in. Several of the questions, obviously, talking about what payers want, of course, and indeed, what is the appetite and how receptive are payers to change and to obviously working in this area. Jennifer Clark says that she's actually had pushback on areas as simple as digital signatures when it comes to accepting these things into workflow. And then also a few questions. David Schwicker asks, could the greatest impact of digital for payers be the future availability of high quality real world evidence so that reimbursement decisions can be better made in a dynamic system of continually collected data, prices increasing and decreasing based on patient outcomes in effectiveness and safety? I'm not sure exactly how that might work, but there's a concept there. He goes on to say digital in this sense could help us leave the rigid system of determining a single price at first approval, and dynamic pricing would be a good thing for a lot of us, and obviously reimbursement accordingly as well. Yeah, I'm just saying, to what extent are patient-reported outcomes incorporated in the value discussion today? What are their sources? And of course, that's an area ripe for greater digital understanding as well. So any comments on that from anybody?
Well, I mean, I think if Freud were alive now, instead of asking what do women want, they'd be asking what do payers want, and he'd get just as wide a variety of answers.
Yes,
there is no monolithic answer to that. I mean, like I was saying before, value is what payers are looking for. There's different ways to express it. There are more refined ways to express it, which speaks to the second question. You know, would it be better to have ongoing data collection and an ongoing, you know, iterative process in order to establish value? Maybe. You know, I mean, I don't think that we have a real answer to that at the moment. If you're starting to talk about collecting, you know, real patient-level data, though, you're starting to look at some very serious governance issues. And I think that we're not really set up for that at the moment. You know, it's very difficult to think about how you could do that in a safe environment and also in a way that provided accountability. Because if you have an ongoing mechanism that changes every month, then who is it finally the buck stops with? You know, that's one thing to think about. And another thing to think about in this sort of context is the idea that payers are always going to want to know what affects patients. So when you talk about patient-related reported outcomes, you know, NICE always says, you know, we want EQ5D. And that is, you know, I admit, a slightly blunt tool, but nonetheless, it does help us to compare across different types of conditions. So no, it doesn't capture some sort of sensory impairments or sleep deprivation or other issues that might be more valid in your particular disease area. That doesn't mean that an overall one isn't valid as well, if, you know, when you're talking about a payer sort of perspective. So digital is great, but you have to use it to address specific issues. And since we're talking about digital payer engagement as opposed to other types of engagements with different sorts of perspectives, then you need to think about what's helpful for making a decision from a payer's perspective.
Thank you. Any further comments on that? Otherwise, I'm going to go to another question. No? Silence? Okay. What I'm going to do actually is ask the audience now for their reflection on pretty much what we've just been talking about. So if you look at your screen right now, to what extent do you believe digital technology will impact traditional market access activities and processes in the next 3 to 5 years? That's the frame we've put on here. So this is just a gauge as to how how much confidence there is, I suppose, as to how much actual change there will be. So will it be significant changes to face-to-face interactions? Will it be significant changes to face-to-face and beyond, including the portals and virtual things that were just mentioned by another questioner? You think it will be limited or slow, or you don't expect any impact at all? So very quickly, do that one. It's a fairly simple question. I can see roughly half of you have voted. 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, everybody, for your answers. Let's have a look at the replies. It's actually, as I would probably expect, approaching 3/5 of you saying significant changes to face-to-face and beyond. So perhaps no surprises there. But what I'm going to actually do is move straight on to another question, since you did that one so nice and quickly, and actually talk about the greatest benefit this time. So once again, look at your screens. If you were to introduce, that's supposed to introduce, sorry, if you were to introduce digital technology in this space, what would actually be the greatest benefit? Is it as a tool to enhance or improve efficiency of face-to-face interaction, that's supposed to say? Is it a device to aid pre-tender negotiation and understanding, general comprehension of what there is, and maybe Matt's website is a way to do that, as a way to provide wider information and background queries, so information perhaps about the disease, or enable people to answer questions via a website, a way to break down barriers between payers and pharma. Quite simply, it's a communication aid, or finally a way to change the very fundamental nature of what payer-pharma communication actually is. So at the moment it's obviously quite sort of direct, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Okay, so a slightly trickier question. I'll hold that open for 3 seconds now. 3, 2, 1. I can see we've got most of you voted there, so thank you very much, everybody. Let's see the results yet again. Okay, a bit more of an even spread this time. In fact, a very even spread, possibly one of the most even spreads I've seen on any webinar question on any topic. So all of the above is my way of summarizing the answer to that one. And perhaps it was a bit tricky for people to choose just one of those as well. But interestingly, that a good 1/5 of people saying it's a way to fundamentally change the actual nature of pharma payer communication in the first place. So I guess there's a sense of ambition there, despite not knowing exactly what the best things to do today are. Any comments from our panel on either of these 2 results that we've just seen?
I think from my side, and also leaning to the question just before that the application of other technologies or other ways to supplement traditional face-to-face meetings, which is, as we know it, relatively limited towards payers, but there are ways of doing that. But adding to that by using different approaches. I was mentioning remote, and I picked up on this statistics that said that 56% are actually of account managers within pharma are actually looking to extend their communications beyond the actual engagement and have a way to follow up remotely. So I see that's kind of an approach, and that's also a way of embracing the focus on the pharma payer relationship. So it's really to optimize the relationship by using different approaches, something that's also based on what the needs of the payer, what they are.
Paul, this is Matt. I agree with Session. I think part of what I see there, at least, is that it probably a lot depends on what the payer's needs are and the kind of relationships that your organization and that account director has with the payer. It could be a lever pulled for different reasons based on that relationship.
Okay, thank you. Any comment from Session or Grace?
I love the idea of digital enabling more kinds of data to be useful. Everyone talks about, wearables, the apps, and, ways of collecting real-time information. And as Sachin said earlier, we need to validate these sorts of things. So I think it would be fantastic in the future to have the opportunity to have something like, a managed access agreement where there's ongoing data collection, and then all of this is put together to make a decision that is more accurate. You know, a lot of times there's a lot of, I won't say supposition, but a lot of judgment about very uncertain data. And it's necessary because otherwise people won't have access to new technologies. You know, it's a real fine balance between quick access and certain access. So I think all of these things really could come together in a very helpful mixture. But I mean, you've put a quite an interesting time frame on it, 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure that the sort of architecture is going to be in place fast enough in 5 years to see the real complete benefits of this. But at the same time, if you'd said 10 to 20 years, it would be a completely different landscape entirely, I suspect.
Can I just ask the audience, maybe people can just write into the question box and give me their reply. But I'm wondering, there is an initiative, an IMI initiative, to try and standardize the approach of collecting patient data in certain areas. That's being led by several different companies and obviously IMI representatives as well. I'm just wondering if anybody is aware of I understand that they haven't been very public with the work yet, but will be very soon. But I'm just wondering if people are indeed aware of the work that's going on there and how confident they might be in whether it's actually going to produce any results. So if you've got any comments to that, even if you've not heard of anything, then do just say so and let me know in the questions box. I'll come back to that later and read out any interesting responses to that. The responses so far are not aware, not heard, not aware, and wasn't aware. So so far, not heard about. People haven't heard about it. Okay, very interesting. Okay, yep. So far, it's 100% no.
Yeah, just to build on sort of what Grace was saying earlier, I think we do have to put the timelines on a little bit more carefully, right? So yeah, if you're looking for sort of short term, i.e., the next few years, we're going to miss some of the opportunities. And I think the opportunities are there to think about newer elements of value that patients care about using technology, the role of technology to make some things more efficient, transparent, learn from these things. But this is a long-term play. And I think we have to sort of be cognizant of that. Now, there's some disruptors, right, that are coming in that might change that equation, and that's great. I think, if we don't in our organizations look at it, then what happens is this gets prioritized lower and lower on the list, and you just sort of, miss time that way. By the way, I am involved with the IMI effort from our end. And I know there's more coming. There's a lot of work happening there. And I think that's a great example of maybe some platforms that require multi-stakeholder engagement to help get that assimilated a bit more, accepted a bit more widely.
Mm. Okay, a few people pointing to the Big Data for Better Outcomes initiative to me on the questions. A few people pointing to the fact that IMI have been working for several years on patient-reported outcomes, and this is in many ways an extension of what's been done before, but unfortunately they haven't been very well communicated so far despite this. So there is work going on, but you might have to hunt a little bit to find it. I want to ask the panel just an open question. We've not got very long left. I do really want to know, though, about priority areas going forward. I'd love to just learn more about, both Sachin and Matt in particular, you seem to have initiatives in place, and you were very kind to share those with us. But what about the priorities going forward? What is the next phase of implementation? And if you had to put your remaining dollars into only one thing that is actually going to make an advance in this digital area, what would it be?
Paul, this for us, it's because of we have a couple of products, one launched and one about to be launched, that have there's a lot of value in pairing those products with digital technologies for measurement, both to improve whether it's diagnosis or that the product is actually being utilized, and which we can turn, we think, into eventually some outcomes-based agreements. And so for us, it's the implementation of the digital technologies, the wearables, and most importantly, and aligns a little to what we just talked about, then working to build some kind of a place where we can share that information between the pharma company and the customer, the physicians, and even the patients in a de-identified and aggregated way. Because as Grace mentioned, it's, the devil in the details around the compliance there, but how do we real time look and see what's working and what's not? So that's going to be our biggest focus in the next 3 years, probably. Thank you.
Sachin?
Yeah, and for us, I think, we have a new CEO coming on board, and we have a chief digital officer that has just been hired, and I think she starts January. So a lot of it will be, bringing all of the digital efforts within the company together under one platform and sort of elevating it within the organization. Albert Bourla has spoken, publicly about the importance of this, and clearly, hired somebody to be on his team. Albert is the new incoming CEO of Pfizer. And so I think that's sort of the journey we are going to be on, and a lot of it will depend on sort of how the leader wants to shape it. But I think there are three things that we are likely to see that I don't think are going away. The role of digital AI within the R&D space, either to make that engine much more efficient, faster, but also to capture through digital technologies newer elements of value within protocol designs and submissions. The second is the role of using digital as a platform to engage with the patients. Albert has said very publicly the role for Pfizer to be much more vocal and engaged in patient centricity, and he sees digital as having a role in that journey. And then the third thing, which will require partnership, is how can we use digital as a platform, and then more importantly, technology as a platform for making the supply chain healthcare system more efficient. And that's a little bit out, I think, in terms of the future, but there are opportunities there because, you see, we can try to make the engine, the first part that I talked about, more efficient internally, but if we don't look at the healthcare system more broadly, then there's miss there for the system at large. So I think Pfizer, as one of the contributors in that journey, would want to, participate in that. So I don't think any of those three things will disappear, but clearly we will wait to get guidance from our new leader coming on board, and that's obviously truly exciting for the company.
Okay, we're nearly out of time, so a final comment from Mads and of course from Grace onto where you'd like to see the real efforts being made as well. If you can keep your answers short, that would be great.
I'm just pleased to see that, pleased to hear that digital is becoming an integral part of what both Sachin and Matt are referring to. And I see, so taking this whole approach and bringing in the digital skill sets, so to think about how digital can be an enabler for what it is that we're trying to achieve. So really understanding the audience and figuring out what problem we're solving, and then decide, so how do we best do that, and how does digital enable that in a better way. I think that's then we're on the right direction, and basically also taking a step-by-step approach. So really, start small, get some early results, and similar to any other project, and bring it into the everyday life and the projects that we're working with. That's going to generate results.
Thank you.
And for me, digital is a tool. It can be used well, it can be used badly, it can be used with sophistication, or it can be used very simplistically. For me, the most important thing about digital is that it supports the fundamental concept of the value proposition for payers.
Excellent. Well, that was a very good line to end on. Really appreciate all of your time, guys. Thank you so much to Sachin, Mads, Matt, and Grace. Been fantastic having you on board here. This is, as I said, a new topic, and you'll see that when you leave, there'll be a few questions for you to answer. Please do just take a second to actually answer those and ensure that we're given the feedback to know how to develop in this area beyond this point, as obviously we're all exploring, we're all in a very similar boat here. If you want to carry on this kind of conversation, then you can do so in Barcelona. That's on March 12th to 14th next year. I'm sure you've heard about it by now. You'll see that Mads is one of the smiling faces on that page. But we do have a track specifically dedicated to market access there. It used to be a separate event, but now it's very much included across the whole sort of commercialization area, and these are some of the people that will be talking at that meeting, so please do come along and learn more about it. Interestingly, we were mentioning IMI programs earlier. The Get Real 2 program and other members who are involved in IMI initiatives are going to be on a panel in Barcelona as well, so you'll be able to learn a bit more about that. Really appreciate your time on board, and obviously wish you good luck with this going forward. That's the end of the slides, and that's the end of today's session. Once again, huge thank you to our panelists, and do send us any feedback as you go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.